Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Health Babes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Campbell with Dr. Crystal Hohn. And today we have Erin Holt on. Erin is a board certified integrative and functional nutritionist. And she talked a lot about her diagnosis with autoimmunity and her connection between her early on in her life eating disorder, how it connected to her autoimmune disease, and how shame is connected with autoimmunity, and the problem with autoimmune treatments in both the conventional and functional medicine worlds. So we hope you love this episode. Hey, everybody, let's welcome Erin Holt to the show. Erin, we are so excited to have you. You know I love you. I followed you forever, and you and I always chat on Instagram. So we're so excited to have you. She has an amazing podcast, guys, and a really cool Instagram page, so you have to go follow her there. How are you?
I'm super great. Stoked to be here. This is the highlight of my week. Let's just say that.
I love that.
All right. Well, let's talk about kind of your story. So we know you had an eating disorder in your teens, and then you had an autoimmune diagnosis. So can you kind of talk about what happened and how, like, the link between those?
Yeah, I didn't realize the link probably until like 5 years ago, but once I uncovered it, I'm like, oh, there's something here for sure. So I just grew up as a kind of a chunky kid, like that was like my body carried weight a certain way. And I am like absolutely like type A perfectionist, only daughter, oldest. So like take on more responsibility than I should, kind of like that trope. And I really like feedback, positive reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when I hit adolescence, I started to grow taller. And then by default, I started to lean out and got so much feedback that I took it in and ran with it. And literally, I started running and I kind of stopped eating, and nobody around me knew that it was problematic until it just became like a super problem. So that was like, I think around 13, I was dealing with overexercise and anorexia. And then in my late teens, it kind of blossomed into bulimia. So this really spanned the course of 13 years of my life between anorexia and bulimia. And I realized I gotta kind of get this in control. And my thought process was kind of in lockstep with what our society teaches young women, which is like, your body is a problem that needs to be fixed. And so I'm like, all right, well, I can fix myself if I figure out how to lose weight and keep it off, then there goes the eating disorder. So how do I do this? I'm going to go back to school to become a dietitian. So I went to dietetic school and studied nutrition conventionally, and spoiler alert, that didn't help.
Yeah.
I graduated and I'm like, all right, I'm not any better. Like I'm arguably a little bit worse. And that is when I was in dietetic school, I was also simultaneously studying energy medicine and clairvoyance and meditation, just because I was so stressed out. I'm like, I have to figure this out. And so after I graduated, I decided to change my approach, because I'm like, this way isn't working. I've been doing it for 13 years. It's not working. Like losing weight isn't going to be the holy grail. This is not the thing that's going to save me. So I started looking at things in a different way. I started practicing yoga. I took a yoga teacher training. I became certified as a health coach, and really opened up my eyes. I took the focus off of food and put it onto other aspects of my life. And that worked really well for me. It was not a conventional approach, but it worked well for me. And I was able to completely heal from my eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized later on is like, I didn't really heal from the mindset and the beliefs associated with that. So I was kind of like, in my eyes, living my best life. I, met my husband, we got married, had a baby. I was teaching yoga, had this nutrition practice, like things were great. And then pretty soon after I gave birth, it kind of all came crashing down. I got really, really sick. And, it's just like the typical story. We've heard it 1,000 times if we've heard it once, like the medical gaslighting from my providers. They were like, you're fine. Labs are normal. You're just tired. Let the baby cry it out. Stop breastfeeding. Take some Marilac. You'll be fine. And that went on for about a year until I advocated for myself hard enough. I mean, like I pulled like a full blown nutty in the doctor's office one day. I'm I'm not leaving here, like chained myself to the desk. Like, I'm not leaving here until I get some answers. And it turns out I had an autoimmune process going on. I was diagnosed with systemic sclerosis, which is like really scary, and a bit traumatic, but it was enough to kind of like shake me up to say like, hey, you got to really prioritize your health. And there's something going on here. And so at that point, that was like about 8 years ago, that's when I discovered functional medicine and this root cause approach. And I'm like, there's something to this. So I studied a lot. I did a lot of certifications and was able to apply those methodologies to myself and to my clients. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's something here. And I would say that took me like about 80% of the way, where I was like feeling better, living a normal life, but I had so much fear of my body kind of like turning on me. I had so much fear of getting sick. Even though most of my days I felt fine, I did live in perpetual fear of getting sick. And so I was like a little bit hypervigilant with my health. And that's when I'm like, there's something else going on that I'm missing. And I became kind of obsessed with spontaneous remission. And like, I'm like, people are legitimately healing their bodies with their minds. How is this going on? I'm fascinated. And I did so much research on that and really started to leverage the power of my mind to influence my body. And that kind of took me the rest of the way. And I was just so fascinated by how much power our mind has over our body. So it really kind of got me thinking, because even though I had healed from the eating disorder, I think I always talk about like going to the root of the root of the root.
Mm-hmm.
I think fundamentally my root cause was feeling like my body was something to be ashamed of, and feeling like there's like fundamentally I am flawed. Fundamentally I am wrong. And it's like, we think about the work of Bruce Lipton, who is like, your brain, your belief system influences your biology. I think about Dr. Candace Pert, who says that the body is the subconscious mind. So if I'm walking around, not even conscious of this, but if I'm walking around with these subconscious beliefs of like, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm a problem to be fixed, my immune system was basically like, okay,
right.
Yeah.
Roger that. Let's start fixing things. And so it wasn't until I started to see myself in a new way, I recognized those beliefs, I started to change those beliefs, is like when I really opened myself up to like full healing.
Yeah. You talk a lot about, shame and autoimmunity. So can you elaborate more on that, and how in focusing on those areas, how you really started to heal after going down the functional medicine approach, right? Doing all the labs, you did a lot of the inner work. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I was reading a book and I saw this quote, and I don't even remember who it was, but it said something about guilt being like an autoimmune illness of the soul. And I was just like, I'm like somebody with like kind of like a guilty conscience. Like I'm always feeling guilty, even if I've never done anything wrong. And I really started to think about shame and how much we're programmed to feel so ashamed about our bodies. Like the act of menstruation is kind of shameful. It's something that we hide. It's something that we divorce ourselves from. There's a book, Sonia Renee Taylor wrote a book called The Body Is Not an Apology. And she has this list of journal prompts where she asks you like, what is the first time you felt shame about your body? And I think about this, I'm like, it's so young. And the more women I ask this, the more I'm just like shocked at how young this starts. And I think about, there wouldn't be a beauty industry, there wouldn't be a diet industry without our shame. Like there are people profiting, like billions of dollars off of us hating ourselves, off of us feeling ashamed about ourselves. We watch, we're a big fan of Bill Murray. My dog's name is Murray after Bill Murray. And so, Groundhog's Day, Andy McDowell, she was like a bona fide babe back in the 80s, and her teeth are straight up yellow. Like go watch a movie from the 80s. Like teeth whitening wasn't a thing back then. So it's like we invent these new reasons all of the time to feel ashamed about ourselves. And I think we really walk around carrying this like deep sense of shame, but we don't really talk about it. And, we know from Dr. Brene Brown's work, Auntie Brene, she talks so much about shame and how shame really needs secrecy in order to thrive. So it's like, we feel shame, we're not talking about it. So it's just festering in our body. And if that is true, because guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I am bad.
Yeah.
So if we truly believe, whether aware of it or not, that we are fundamentally bad and wrong, then it is not shocking. And if we grow up this way, learning this through our culture or even through our family of origin, it is not shocking that the autoimmune stats are what they are, which is like 1 in 12 women will end up with an autoimmune disease. 78% of all diagnosed autoimmune diseases are women, right? It's like the odds are stacked against us. And sure, hormonal fluctuations play into it, no doubt. But I think there's something even deeper going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes
Well,
a
even
lot of
think
sense.
about, way back in the day, with not all the distractions and the stress and so much on our plates, right? You didn't hear of all of these things, all these autoimmune conditions. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we have just so much on our plate too, and we just take on so much. So
and then when we bring it up, like bring it up to our healthcare providers, it's like this, we're like, they're basically telling us it's not real. I remember this is on Instagram. I had shared a story and there was somebody who was in med school. And I'm not somebody who knocks doctors. You know what I mean? Like if I hurt my arm or like have like a real injury, I'm going to a doctor. Like I'm not going to my acupuncturist or like, essential oils or something. But I think med school, I don't know. Like, I think there's this, it's like, you think about real experts, like I think a hallmark of a real expert is like, I don't know anything at all. And like somebody who's like brand new is like, I know everything. But I remember sharing my experience. And she said, I'm sorry that happened to you, but anecdotal evidence isn't evidence.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I actually disagree. I believe that lived experience is real, because all of that is saying is that your experience actually isn't real and it doesn't matter. So we're getting these messages all of the time, like what I'm experiencing isn't real. It's not valid. We're constantly being told that. It creates lack of trust in our own body. It creates lack of trust with ourselves. And it's just, I think it just sets us up for so much issues, because we're like constantly walking around feeling like we can't trust our own experience and that it like is not real. So we like start gaslighting ourselves.
Yeah.
This summer, there was this article that came out in the Boston Globe, and it was about a woman, like how the brain changes in a woman after she gives birth. Like there's like actual real changes in our brain. And so the article was kind of like, no wonder why so many women are experiencing postpartum anxiety and depression. Like there's real physiological changes. And the author interviewed this old pediatrician. He was like 92, I think, at the time of the interview. He had written a book back in the 60s. And like good shit, he was like kind of cutting edge at that time. And she sat down with him and she felt so validated because he really understood. He like got it. And she's like, well, why aren't we talking about this more? Why isn't this more of a thing? And he's like, well, just because we don't want to scare women. Like almost like you can't handle the information about your own body. Right? Yeah. Like you can't, we don't trust you to handle this stuff. It's too big. It's too much for your little sweet brain. So we're just not going to tell you at all. And we go through these experiences and we feel like we're crazy. And then we feel ashamed. And so we don't talk about it and the shame festers. And there's like no platform to discuss it. I'm sharing about it on my own platform and I have a med student swoop in being like, that's not real.
Well, that's what I was going to say with social media. It's crazy because let's say you do feel like, okay, I'm going to share about this. Then you're going to have however many people shaming you for having whatever thought or experience that you have. It's hard. It's hard for people to even open up if they feel like they can because of the feedback, right? Like,
totally.
Like you got, yeah.
I learned about, I learned about this concept of gestalt. I don't know. I mean, if there's like a psycho or like a therapist listening to this right now, or a psychiatrist, they're like, she doesn't know what she's talking about, but hear me out. I'm proud. They're like, shut up. But it's a good one. And I think a lot of people can relate. I certainly did. If we're not taught to like appropriately manage our emotions at a young age, or if we're not taught to kind of like appropriately metabolize our emotions or like what to do with them, if we are kind of taught like, don't feel emotions, like don't cry, be a good little girl, like, you know what I mean? Like you're too emotional. Then we don't really know how to like appropriately process them. And so I think a lot of us feel this about shame. So it's like anything that happens in present time is kind of, that makes us feel ashamed, is like basically pulling on a string. Almost think of it as like a string of pearls, pulling on a string of every single time you experienced shame, like since the dawn of time. So that for me, that would be 38 years.
Right.
When I feel shame, like that's how real it feels. And it wasn't, I'm like, it feels awful. I think shame is that one emotion that we would do anything to avoid. And so it's like, there's no shortage of opportunities, to Dr. Becky's point, to experience shame. When, any day, like you open up your phone, there's like, opportunities abound for feeling shame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's something that we have to be talking a little bit more about. And my biggest piece of advice, if like for shame, is to like pull it out of the dark, like shine a flashlight on it, share your shame with somebody who you trust, like get it out. The bulimia, I mean, as it is with a lot of folks, my bulimia was absolutely locked behind closed doors. That was a secret. Nobody knew about that. And I just think about how much shame I had to carry around day in and day out to like hold that secret. And now I experience nothing. Like it's just like such a clean energy, because I'm like, I've been able to like bust it out of hiding and shine some light on it. So I don't experience shame. I can talk about it without a problem now.
Going back to talking about Groundhog Day and Andie MacDowell and, what she was considered like hot then, and looking at people now, and, and I always see people saying, why aren't these celebrities telling everyone all the plastic surgeries they had? Right. And it's the shame aspect. That's why they don't want to. It's not, in my opinion, it's not necessary that they want to hide it. It's that they don't want to hear your thoughts on it and feel, maybe they already feel a little weird about it. And then the comments are going to make them feel more shame about it. So I think that, it's just plays such a role in so many things, and then wanting to look a certain way because of the way that time has progressed and the way that you would use who you're seeing as the main role in these movies and stuff. Now people are feeling shame for not looking like that. Then they're getting procedures to look like that. Then they're feeling shame about those procedures and they're not wanting to admit to them. So I don't know. This is just what's coming up in my head, because I always see people saying that. And I'm like, why would they tell everybody? They're going to be like berated.
But can you imagine if your entire livelihood was predicated on you looking a very specific way?
Barf. Yes.
I'm just like, my heart goes out, because it's such a precarious place to be in, because it's like, you will, if you don't get work, you will lose work. You know what I mean? You will lose paid work. And then if you get work and people know, well, Jesus.
Right. Then,
it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. It would be very, very hard. I was just having this conversation this morning with my friend. I'm like, I don't think I have like the fortitude to actually live in a place like LA or Beverly Hills. No. Like I think I would completely come undone.
Yes.
No, it's true. It's true.
Mentally, it's just not, power to you if you can, but it would not be for me either. I know.
But there's also this, like, we live in this, we've created this culture, particularly with women, where it's like, we have been fed a lie that there's only so much to go around, so much beauty, so much love, so much 100%. Success, so much money. And so we've really been taught to like pit each other against each other, because when we look at somebody else doing well or looking a certain way, we internalize that as like, oh, there's less available for me. There's less of that, whatever that's love, success, money, beauty, whatever. There's less of that available to me. And so if that is true, then I need to like kind of tear her down. It's like tall poppy syndrome. You know, like if she gets like a little too high, a little too big for her britches, she grows a little bit too tall, gets a little bit too shiny, we got to tear. It's my job to tear her down to kind of even the playing field. And I just see this play out so much. And it makes me so sad because it doesn't have to be that way. That is really kind of a lie that we've been fed, what we've all bought into as though it was truth. And I just feel like this is kind of, taking a little bit of a spin away from the original topic, but I do feel like if our sense of self is predicated on somebody else doing poorly, like how strong and stable is our sense of self really?
Right.
Exactly. I know.
It's true. And that's why, like, even in our business, right? You can either put people down if they're doing better than you, or you can support them. And this is why I love your podcast and just all listening to all these different podcasts, because we do the same thing. You and I and Crystal, we all work with people the same way, but we know that there are plenty of people that need help.
Yes.
And we need to not just talk about ourselves and what we can do. We need to share what everybody that we know of, that we respect, can do too. And I just wish that there was more of that going on in, other situations.
Yeah, there's really no need to hoard resources. You know what I'm thinking about? Remember the Balanced Bites podcast with Diane Sanfilippo and Liz Wolfe? This is back in the day.
Yeah, that was one of my first podcasts I was ever on, actually.
I bet that's where I even heard of you. You know what I mean? They were like real pioneers. But I remember Diane, who I do not know personally. I've never met her, never had a conversation with her.
Same me either.
Like, like saying her name like we're besties. She doesn't know me. but I remember her really constantly promoting other people. And I remembered seeing that because my business was just kind of like blossoming at that time. And she led by example in my eyes, because her doing that signals out to everybody else, like there's enough to go around. Cause she would talk about her competitors, like people doing the exact same thing as her all the time, promote them, support them. And I just thought, I'm so grateful to have somebody to look to like this, to kind of show me how it's done. I love looking to people like ahead, doing the things that I want to be doing. Oh,
for sure.
You know what I mean?
How we learn. And it's great.
It was just a really beautiful experience for me to have early on, to be like, there's enough for everybody. Like we're all going to be fine.
She did that for me. Like I had no following, and I had my first book. She promoted my first book. No one knew who I was when I went on their podcast. And then when I had my second book come out, I sent her a copy, and she posted it on her Instagram page. I thought that was really nice. Yeah.
She's a real kingmaker.
Yeah.
It's great. Oh, sorry, Beck, you go.
I was going to say, let's go back into autoimmunity a little bit. So
you guys don't want to talk about business anymore.
I kind of do. I'm not going to lie.
We could go down that direction.
But I'm sure the listeners probably want to hear about autoimmunity. So, when you get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, you have a choice. You can go conventional, you can go functional medicine, or nothing, So, what did you experience, as far as autoimmune treatment strategies? Like, what is the problem? Let's talk about that with both conventional and functional medicine strategies.
I honestly think both camps are kind of failing autoimmune patients across the board. I think autoimmune patients are really at a loss. We know it takes up to like 10 years, somewhere between like 4 to 10 years in some cases, to get a diagnosis. And that's if you're one of the lucky ones. And people can go through 10 to 12 medical professionals to actually get an autoimmune diagnosis. It's not like there's like one test for autoimmunity, there's different markers that can kind of clue us in, but there's not like you can go to your doctor and be like, test me for the autoimmunity. That doesn't really exist. And on top of that, kind of feeding into what we were talking about before, 45% of autoimmune patients have been labeled as chronic complainers. So this is what I talk about with like the gaslighting. They're just being told like you're complaining, right? Like you're kind of a hypochondriac. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, is like when really like people are suffering. So we kind of all know all of that, but we're still, even when somebody gets a diagnosis, it can feel like a real accomplishment after like working so hard to get one. But the conventional approach is kind of like to just shut down the immune system. It's like, well, that's acting crazy, so we're just going to suppress it altogether. And I just had a client last week who was recently diagnosed with UC, with colitis, and her gastroenterologist told her unequivocally, diet and lifestyle will not make a difference here. This is 2022. So this is what patients are still hearing. Like this is an autoimmune illness of the colon.
In your gut.
Yes. Like I
don't
just
worry
don't
about
even,
what you eat.
I just don't even understand how we're still here.
I know.
So it's like, there's this one school of thought, which is like the body makes mistakes, the body attacks itself. We're a victim to the environment. We're just kind of like sitting ducks, victim to circumstance. There's no explanation of how things get started, right? Like your body can just turn on a dime, which is kind of scary, you know?
Yeah.
That like unknown is just, I think, so dysregulating for our human brains. Like our brains like to know what to expect. So I see like a lot of people kind of pitched into this hypervigilant state. Like I got this diagnosis. It was really hard to get the diagnosis. And now I just have to like constantly be afraid that, you know, my body's going to turn on me. And then we have functional medicine, which I think is really steeped in this like fundamental belief that the body does have the ability to heal itself, right? We put a lot of belief in the body's innate capacity to heal. At least I truly believe that. So our job as practitioners is to kind of help people promote health. Like if the body is not able to maintain homeostasis, we have to figure out why. And that's where functional medicine, kind of like the systems biology approach, root cause approach can really come in, because we can start to drill into what are those obstacles to health, what's happening. But my issue with the functional medicine approach to autoimmunity is that it can sometimes be a little overly simplistic, right? All you got to do is heal your gut. And it's like, well, gosh, I wish that were the case.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've seen a lot of leaky gut protocols in my day, and I've seen exactly 0 of them completely reverse autoimmunity,
Right.
which is not to say leaky gut intestinal permeability isn't real or it's not a factor. It's just not as simple as like, that's the only factor. And so
it's a piece to the puzzle.
It's
and there's
piece.
many pieces.
Yes.
And I know that can feel so discouraging for people to hear, because it can be, you know, a job to try to like break down this root cause approach. But I just think what we've done with functional medicine is like take this algorithmic approach from conventional medicine, this kind of like template-based cookie cutter approach, and just put it on people. We're just using different tools. And that is my concern with the functional medicine space, is that can be actually extremely helpful for like a lot of folks, but it doesn't usually work for these really complex cases.
Yeah.
And so once again, they're the patients who are like slipping through the cracks. So the like conventional medicine approach kind of failed me, but then also this like functional medicine approach is kind of failing me too. And I think that that's where we have to have the willingness and the tenacity to be willing to like go deeper. And sometimes that's deeper than just what's happening on like a physical body level.
Right.
It's so much more than that sometimes. And we work with so many really sensitive patients, you know, mast cell activation syndrome patients, and can't breathe air. I mean, barely, you know, and we talk to them a lot about dealing with trauma and, you know, working on how your body's processing things, how your brain processes things before you can even get into taking supplements and all that kind of stuff. So there's so many pieces to that puzzle, and to tell anybody that it's a simple thing is doing them a disservice, really.
I think it's an absolute disservice, because then what happens, like the shame game comes back. It's like functional medicine was supposed to be the thing to fix me. This was supposed to be the thing.
Right.
And not even this can help me. I must really be such a lost cause. And I think that's just where we're seeing a lot of people, especially with these complex chronic cases, whether it's autoimmunity or, you know, just like the hyper reactivity that you tend to see more in your practice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, you know, coming off of that, right? So people who have autoimmune conditions that are listening to this and they're like, oh my goodness, feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Let's kind of back up. Like you talk about the 4 bodies of health, right? And why we should care about that. Can you get into that right now? Let's see.
Yeah, I think about the work that we do as like on 4 different planes. I think I'm coming up on my 10-year wedding anniversary. And
Aw, that's awesome. Congrats.
And thank you. Like, you made it.
I'm telling you.
Hang on, girl.
But our wedding song was Talking Heads, This Must Be the Place. And there's this lyric that's feet on the ground, head in the sky. And it's like, we have to do, I think what happens is it becomes like an either or, like either we're working on like the trauma and the emotional release and the mindset, or we're doing the physical body stuff. Right. And it's like, it's all, and it's, everything also. But we really have to, I do see the feet on the ground work as kind of that physical body, right? That's the food, that's the supplements, that's the lab testing. That's like talking about circadian rhythm, like getting outside in nature, like really taking care of this physical body of ours. So important. But then there's like all this other stuff too. Yeah. It's the mental body, the emotional body, the energetic body, our subconscious beliefs absolutely run like the physical body show. And so it might be, we know like from the ACE studies, like adverse childhood experiences, if you experienced adversity, trauma in childhood, you are more likely to end up with autoimmunity or another chronic condition later in life. But it doesn't actually have to be some big traumatic event. Yeah. It can just be the way that you were taught. We have our brains are processing like 11 million bits per second of information now in modern day, 11 million. And our conscious brain can only hold on to like 50 or 100 bits. Right? So
it's really overwhelming even to think about, right?
It's so overwhelming. So our brain is constantly deleting, distorting, and generalizing. Our brain like has to categorize things, like drop things into buckets. And so we have these subconscious filters that come in. It's like, have you ever been with somebody and you're talking about an experience and you're like, that is not the way I remember it. Like what planet is this person living on? It really is. We can like be perceiving 2 completely different realities. That's our filters. And so if we have filters in place, my favorite way to explain this is, when I bought my car, it's a white 4Runner. And that was like my dream car. I wanted a white 4Runner. It had to be white. And so we were looking for a white 4Runner. My husband was trying to find one. And for those few weeks, all I saw was white 4Runners.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I got on the road and it was like white 4Runner everywhere. And it wasn't just because like everybody and their mom decided to buy a white 4Runner at the same time. It's just that my brain had like flagged and tagged that information as like really important. And so I saw it. I became aware of it. It was in my conscious brain. So we have to kind of understand what those filters are, because this really plays into illness, but more so like into recovery and healing, especially for folks who, I just keep using the term hypervigilant, but that they're like really ultra focusing on their body sensations, or really ultra focusing on their symptoms, because they have to be, right? They have to catch every single thing that comes their way, or somebody's going to miss it. If I don't catch this, somebody's going to miss it. These are the people that are constantly researching their symptoms, researching their health. Yeah. And because it served a purpose. So the brain is like, hey, these body experiences are really important. You gotta keep them in your conscious brain. So we just become hyper focused on everything that's happening on a body level. And I just see this trend quite a bit in my autoimmune chronic people. I'm sure you guys see this a lot too, especially with something like MCAS and histamine stuff. Like we're just like Johnny on the spot. Like, what's the thing that's going to break down right now? What's the big reaction I'm going to have? We can see this with food sensitivities oftentimes. And so I'm just bringing this up because it's so commonplace, but we have to understand that these are like things that are happening on a brain-based level. And so if the root is like the things that are happening in the brain, then the solution is also at a brain-based level. I keep coming back to this. I don't know where I heard it. I don't know, maybe I just like made it up in my journal one day. I don't know, but it's like, with autoimmunity, it's like my immune system is the problem. Like my body is the problem. When in reality, it's like, I'm the solution. Like I'm not the problem here. I'm the solution. Right. And so if we can kind of reframe that and understand that if we go all the way up to the top, that's where a lot of our solutions can come in, is like the way that we're seeing things, the way that we're viewing things, the way that we think. But first we have to be really aware of those, right? We can't change what we're not aware of. So that's kind of what I mean by mental body. It's like the mindset, the thought processes that are happening, the things that are happening on a subconscious level that we're not even aware of. Like I said, I'm like obsessed with Candace Pert's work. I thought she was just like such a maverick in this space. She was like the one that really kind of put psychoneuroimmunology on the map, which it's just incredible that there's a field of study that says like, yeah, your psyche, your mind, your thought, your belief system actually does influence everything else going on in your body. So it's like not, like we're not living in Descartes times where like the mind and the body are two separate entities, right? Like it's all interwoven. And so yes, physical body matters, but also the mental body matters as well. The emotional body is stuff that we've kind of already been talking about, is like understanding how, like what we're feeling. Many of us don't have a very high emotional IQ. Like that kind of like, how do we understand what we're feeling at any given time? I remember when I was 16, going through some hormonal changes. They put me on antidepressant and sent me to therapy. And the therapist was like, how are you feeling? I'm like, good, bad. Like I had no other tools, no other words to explain to her. I had the good and I had the bad, right? I was never really taught like these are emotions. Like, let's talk about it. I think the tides are kind of turning, like it's a generational thing for sure. But if we weren't taught that, then like how to understand the messages of our body, then we're going to be adults that still don't really understand that. So that's really, really important, because those emotions are messages. And so we have to understand like, what is our inner self trying to communicate to us? And then the energy body is like, we're all energy. So it kind of all of it together. But I think about the chakra system and like the energy centers in our body. And this really feeds into a lot of what's happening on a physical level as well. So I just love kind of diving into the deeper stuff with people, because I usually feel like that's where a lot of the true healing happens.
Oh, so true. Sure. We store so much in our body, and it manifests as illness, but it can be from something from childhood, it's just, it's really important to tackle all of it.
Yeah. I think I got the term unmetabolized emotions from Gabor Mate. Like, I think, isn't it such a good phrase, because it really gets the point across. Like this hasn't been dealt with. I'm going to share a potentially gross story just to kind of drive home this point. This just happened. I'm going to talk about poop. So,
okay. I love it.
We love poop. We're good. The past few weeks, there was like some things going on emotionally and, like family stuff, work stuff, all of it, like I'm a human being, right? Living in a human body. And I noticed I have a history of like ongoing constipation since I was a little kid. So that's like kind of like one of my things. But I noticed that I was a little backed up, not going as well. And that my stool looked different. So if you're in this functional medicine space, sometimes we look at our poop to be like, what's going on?
It's all right, guys. We do.
And it looks different, I could tell that I was not breaking down my fat. Okay. And that's not usually a thing for me. Fat malabsorption, like gallbladder issues, like not usually a thing. So I was like, okay, noted. And then I was waking up in the middle of the night, also not a thing for me. I keep my phone off at night, but my daughter was having a sleepover. So I kept it on this night. So when I woke up, I looked at my phone and it said 3 a.m. Oh, and I was like, 3 a.m.
What's going on?
The liver. It's like, if it hadn't been exactly 3 a.m., I wouldn't have connected the dots at 3 a.m. But I was like, wait a second. There's some gallbladder stuff. There's some liver stuff. And I know I didn't study traditional Chinese medicine. So I want to just,
put that out
have
there.
deep
Yeah.
reverence and respect for the people that do, but I have enough of an understanding to know that different organs are kind of associated with different things. And the liver really is responsible, not just for processing our toxins, but also our anger.
Yeah.
And the big thing that had been coming up for me was like anger and resentment. And I just saw it all play out. Like nothing had changed in my diet. Nothing had changed in my movement patterns. Like I wasn't doing anything different other than like there was big emotions that were coming up that needed to be dealt with. And I saw it play out through my physical body.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is just like one more way to get in touch with what's happening in your body. You don't have to look at your poop every day, but there's an example, right? And like I said earlier, we are taught from such an early age to divorce ourselves from our bodies because our bodies are shameful. Our desires are shameful, whether that's craving for food or sex. It's like all like, we don't talk about that. Right.
Yeah.
And so we cut ourselves off very early from like our physical sensations and from our emotions and from things that are coming up. And I think so much of the healing process is bringing that back online, reconnecting with ourselves, listening to those messages, getting curious about what they mean, asking those questions, like doing a, kind of like internal deep dive on ourselves regularly. I think it's so important for healing.
For sure. Go ahead, Beck.
I was just going to say, when people will come to us, and I'm sure you get this a lot too, and they're like, okay, so if I go through, if I heal my gut and I work on this and blah, 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 am I going to be better? Right. Mm-hmm. And we're like, yes, maybe, you should feel better. However, things can come back up in your life. We have stress, and things can come back up, and that could be like your biggest trigger. And that's going to be a time where, let's just give an example. You might start needing to eat low histamine foods again, or whatever, until you get through whatever's going on and you deal with that issue and whatever season of your life. So we always really try to explain to people, we're very honest. We're like, especially because we work so much with mast cell and histamine, people are like, okay, so I'm going to stop eating high histamine foods, and then I'm going to heal my gut and, reduce my estrogen, whatever it is. And then I'm going to be okay, right? I'm going to be able to eat all high histamine foods. And I'm like, no. I mean, sometimes, sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't, and you're going to have to manage, your health is something that you always have to manage by dealing with all of the reasons it started in the first place. Mm-hmm. And if it's stress driven and trauma driven, those reasons can resurface, and you're going to have to keep working on that and diving back into that.
Yeah, I love to manage expectations. Mm-hmm. And also, like, I'm never trying to I believe in limitless possibilities. Like, let's just zoom into the quantum field and just like do some fun shit. So I'm never trying to like take anything off the table as a potential option for somebody. Like, full and complete healing may be available to you. Yeah. And also, let's be realistic. Yeah. And we can do both. I'm like so big on tools to recalibrate. Right. Cause like when somebody's been in a really scary, bad, dark place with their health, they're terrified of going back to that dark place. So they want to be like armed with tools. And so that's the most important thing, is to be like, hey, you might have a little dip. There might be a little bump in the road, to your point. And also, like, it doesn't mean you're going to go rushing back to that dark, scary time, but we've got tools here to just simply recalibrate yourself.
Yeah. And that's why we refer a lot of people to different programs, stuff that we're not experts on, like brain retraining, whatever it is, meditation. Like, we're like, this is what I always say. I'm like, you're going to be able to identify your triggers now, so it may be stress or whatever it may be. And then now you're going to have this tool. And this is going to help you kind of pull yourself back to that really good point where you felt really good or whatever. So we always try to equip them with tools, but we are honest. We're like, life is hard. I mean, I love to say you're never going to have another symptom in your entire life, but I would be lying to you if I promised you that, but you're going to learn how to identify what's causing it. and you're going to learn how to deal with it a lot quicker than you know how to now,
Yeah.
I was on Amazon looking for a book yesterday, and there was like it was a microbiome book by Dr. Mark Pimentel is what I was looking for. And so then all the other books in that kind of category came up, and there was one that was like, resolve your root cause issues in 21 days.
Oh,
How simple.
Wouldn't that be just dandy?
Yeah.
Like, sign me up.
Yeah.
Erin, can you share, like, this all like kind of pulls this together. Like I listened to your podcast about your secretory IGA, which was so cool. How you kind of tied this in. You did all the gut work, all the things, but your secretory IGA was always, really borderline low, right? And then
it was low.
Low.
Low as it could get, like scraping the bottom of the
nothing
barrel.
There, like no immune system.
Do you exist? Do I have an immune system?
It was
so
negative.
Undetected.
Yes. I just thought that was like my thing. Like I'm like, I don't think my body can produce this immunoglobulin. It was like, I've done a lot of, this is looking at it in stool only, I should say.
Right.
Well, first maybe say what it is, because a lot of people listening probably don't know what it is.
Fair point. So secretory IGA is what we're talking about. It's an immunoglobulin, and it exists pretty much wherever there's mucus. So we have it in our mouth, we have it in our vagina, we have it in our gut. And it's kind of like the first line of defense for our body's immune system, right? So if it's low, that's a problem because things can kind of get in, it's like the bouncer at the bar. If the bouncer at the bar is gone, it becomes a problem. And you know what I mean? Things are going to cause a ruckus. So mine has just always been consistently low for years and years and years. And I'm like, like we start to attach stories to things. And I'm like, this is because I have the autoimmunity. It's never going to come on, blah, 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 blah. This is my thing. And it was like sometime in COVID, I was, are you familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza's work?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love him.
Obsessed with him. So he does these like weekend long retreats, and they started doing biomarkers of the people like who are meditating in these retreats. And one of the markers they look at is secretory IGA. I'm assuming that they test it through saliva.
Okay.
I actually don't know if that's true.
Right.
Not through stool.
Because how fast it would come back. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But they have shown that in like 4 days of just doing meditation, that immunoglobulin has been able to raise significantly in 4 days. And so, through COVID, I'm like, I'm going to bolster my immunity. So I was really committed to a daily meditation practice. I've meditated for 15 years, but kind of like a fair weather meditator. Yeah. Like when shit hits the fan, I'm like, I'm going to meditate.
And daydream for most of it.
So I committed to 10 minutes a day of this very specific meditation style. And it's really about, we can talk about it afterward, but it has everything to do with like where your mind is at, like your mind and how you feel physically in your body. And I wasn't like trying to change biomarkers. I'm like, I just will do anything to support my health in this time. And I happened to do a stool test after maybe like, I don't even know, a few months of doing this. And I was shocked because my secretory IGA levels were up in normal, healthy range for literally the first time in like maybe 6 years.
Wow.
So that was the only variable that changed. It was like real nervous system support and also doing this specific practice for a few months, 10 minutes a day, not even a lot, 10 minutes a day. Mm. And so obviously that's like N=1, but I started implementing more of that kind of stuff in my practice and just seeing really, really profound results. The more we can dive into the mind, and we're not trying to therapize our clients, right. It's just bringing their awareness to like whatever's happening at the level of your mind really is influencing your body. And people are like into it, people are really into it. I think people are understanding like, I'm looking for another way, Well,
plus it's something that people can do at home, because it's hard as functional medicine practitioners. We talk a lot about testing and stuff like that, but sometimes people can't do that. And we want to have tools to give people that they can do on their own or do at home that can really help move the needle with their health as well. So that's why we love that stuff too.
And
Yeah.
it's like free wellness,
Exactly.
like I'm all for biohacking and stuff, but we can't like
100%.
skip steps. We can't skip the fundamental basics and expect to get good results.
Yeah.
So true.
And you talk a lot about joy too, right? We need to have lots of joy in our life. Like you in that podcast, I loved that. Even just, hanging out with friends or doing things that make you really happy, right? And spending more time in that space is so important for gut health and everything in general.
That was like, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but like, that was a really hard thing for me to do, was to like experience joy for myself. Right.
Yeah.
Like there's a guilt. I read this book called Feminine Genius a few years ago. And this one phrase has stuck out in my head. She referred to it as the shameless joy of being alive. And I'm like, I can feel full body chills when I think about it, because it really kind of says that like many of us feel shame when we feel joy. Like we feel good and we're like, I'm not supposed to feel good, or I should be, my job here, my role here is to make everybody else feel good. Everybody else's comfort needs exist above my own. And so who am I to do something for me to make me feel good? Right. And so that was like a bona fide thing that I had to overcome, is allowing myself to experience joy without feeling like a sense of guilt around that.
Right. So
I don't have that issue. I really don't.
Becky,
I've never felt bad about having fun.
That is, I think you're like, that's rare. I really feel like that's rare. I
think it's a necessity.
Yeah,
it is. No, I mean, for sure. It totally is. When you I was, one of my good friends does pelvic floor PT. So she sees a lot of new moms, and we were joking. It's like, you ask like a mom what they do for fun, and they just like stare at you like,
hi, like wash my hair maybe, or
fun. What is this word that you're saying to me? So I think we have to bring back like joy, pleasure, desire, fun, like bring it all back online. And those are genuinely, like those are the emotions, because the meditation style that I'm talking about is like tapping into those emotions. Like, what does your body feel like when you experience joy and excitement and elation and gratitude and love? That's really what you're trying to do, is like feel the feelings of that and hold that feeling for as long as possible. And it is it's more healing than any supplement you could take, is like allowing
100%.
yourself to feel joy.
Yeah,
it's true. And that's why like on my Instagram, I'll dress up in a hot dog outfit and dance to Charlie Puth, because I want people to relax and have fun and learn at the same time. But like, let's laugh together.
Laughter is the best.
It really is. Really. Like I can't imagine
life without
I can't imagine feeling bad about wanting to feel that way either. So anyone who does, let's normalize.
I think
laughing.
you've reached enlightenment, I think, is what we've discovered in this call.
Erin, you're a trip. I just love you. You're so fun to talk with. So where can people find you? Tell them about your programs, all the things.
I would say the two best places to catch me are on Instagram and the podcast. So the Functional Nutrition Podcast, functional is spelled with a K. And then on Instagram, I'm the Functional Nutritionist, same deal. Functional spelled with a K.
And Erin has really good reels. I love your reels.
Oh, thank you.
And she keeps it real, like in her reels. And I'm no pun intended, but you do. And that's why we love you too. So.
I went to the dentist yesterday and they were like, your treatment plan is very straightforward. And I was like, good, because so is my personality. Like, you know what you're going to get with me.
Same.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It was so much fun.
Thank you guys for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And if you love this episode, please leave a review. It only takes a couple minutes. And you can find out more about us on drbeckycampbell.com. And you can follow us over at Instagram on @HealthBabesPodcast, @Dr. Becky Campbell, and @Dr. Crystal Hohn. Have an amazing day.